And welcome to all you firefighters, fire drill firefighters, and those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Friday family, where we're building community, learning about the climate crisis, and taking action to address it. Each of you can help us grow the movement, by sharing today's show. And we want to be sure that you let your family and colleagues know about it. So take a moment now and hit the share button, because the more people that understand about the gravity of the climate situation and are willing to act, the more chance we have to really succeed in minimizing it. So do please share. And also, I want to remind you that Earth Day is next week, and we're hosting a very special youth episode that will be focused on the future that we're fighting for. So we want to hear what young people have to say about climate. Young ones say from 5 years old to 12 years old. So if you have kids that age in your life, we're inviting you to film their answers to the questions, what is climate change? And if you were in charge, how would you fix it? Okay, upload the video to any social media platform with the hashtag #ClimateKids. Now, some good news, big good news. This week, huge good news about our ability to get transformative legislation passed in the Senate that will help our planet and our communities. Democratic senators thought they only had one more opportunity now that Biden's rescue plan has passed, using the budget reconciliation process and thus bypassing the filibuster. But the parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough agreed with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer that there are actually more budget reconciliation opportunities available. See, it's complicated and arcane, but the budget reconciliation is a process where senators can take accelerated action on legislation with the caveat that it has to relate to spending. It has to have an effect on the budget. So what does this mean for our fight? It means now that the pathway for getting around the filibuster and advancing some of the legislation that most impacts our lives and communities and climate has been made somewhat easier. Specifically, it opens up the possibility that Biden's various bills, his budget plans, his American jobs plans won't get watered down by Republicans, who basically, according to Mitch McConnell, are not going to support any part of any Biden legislation, it seems. And, in order to get past the filibuster, you have to have 60 votes. There are 50 Democrats in the Senate, which means they'd have to win over 10 Republicans. And I don't know, it's not likely to happen because of Mitch McConnell. So this new ruling is really a big, important thing. Things like H.R. 1, the voting rights bill, that can't go through budget reconciliation. The $15 minimum wage, that can't go through budget reconciliation. Frankly, I don't understand why, because it certainly affects the budget. But anyway, it's been ruled that it can't go through that. But a lot of things that we need can go through budget reconciliation. So onward. I know that we all agree that Biden's presidency, his cabinet appointments, his $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan have all been major causes of hope. And boy, have we needed to hope again, right? Just last week, Biden announced his American Jobs Plan, a $2.7 trillion plan that has a lot to like in it. It contains many of the things that we wanted to see and is broad in scope. It mentions the need for strong labor, equity, environmental standards our movements have called for, and we want to thank him for this. We have to celebrate the wins that we get. But the significant problem with the American Jobs Plan is scale. See, we need 3 times more investment, at least $1 trillion a year over the next 10 years in order to provide good jobs for everybody who's currently unemployed, to match what science tells us must happen if we're going to meet the gravity of the climate crisis, and to meaningfully counteract the legacy of underinvestment in frontline communities. So, fellow fire drill fighters, we're going to have to really push Congress to up the ante and pass the legislation we need to get them passed, okay? The American Jobs Plan calls for investing $2.25 trillion over 8 years to create 5 million jobs. But that would mean leaving 2 out of every 3 unemployed people out of a job. The Thrive Agenda gave the president a blueprint for investing $10 trillion over 10 years to immediately create more than 15 million good jobs and end the unemployment crisis, put everyone to work, cut climate pollution in half by 2030, and advance racial, indigenous, gender, environmental, and economic justice. Now, during his campaign, as we've talked about, President Biden promised to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel corporations receive $20 billion in federal subsidies every year, adding up to approximately $150 billion over 10 years. This week, Biden released his tax plan that eliminated only $35 billion in tax credits and loopholes over a 10-year period. That is hardly ending fossil fuel subsidies. And it isn't good enough, and we cannot accept that. And I'm sure you agree, not a dime of our tax dollars should go toward corporations that poison our communities and wreck our climate. And 55% of all voters, Democrats and Republicans and independents, support ending fossil fuel subsidies, with support obviously even higher among Democrats. Do you know that fossil fuel pollution killed 350,000 Americans in 2018 alone? Why should we be giving a dime to any of these people? The Thrive Agenda last year was endorsed by more than 100 members of Congress and 300 leading unions, racial justice, and climate groups. Not only does it give us that $10 trillion per year, which, believe me, is a needed investment, but it also further expands the scope in some key areas, creates more jobs, supports indigenous sovereignty, addresses racial injustice, and yes, it supplies direct support to the front lines. The American Jobs Plan is good, and there's a lot to like in it, but the Thrive Agenda would be truly transformative. And folks, listen, we are at this existential civilizational crossroads where everything is at stake. Transformation is what is needed. As Sunrise Movement Director Varshini Prakash said, Biden did such a great job telling the truth about the COVID crisis. Now he needs to use his bully pulpit in the same way with the climate crisis in order to build the political support for the more transformative vision contained in the Thrive Agenda. This is the agenda that meets the interlocking crisis we face, and that, when passed, can enshrine Biden as the truly transformative presidency. So we're gonna really work on that. And I am totally thrilled to have as my guest today, Democratic Governor Jay Inslee of the great state of Washington. As you know, Governor Inslee ran in the presidential primaries in 2020 and was dubbed the climate candidate because he was the first ever candidate to feature the climate crisis front and center during his campaign. This had a huge impact on the other Democratic candidates who borrowed many of his positions as their own. I just want to show you something. See this? I did an event for Governor Inslee when he was running, and as a thank you, he made this with this indigenous art. This is a box that he made and sent me. Isn't that impressive? He paints too. Governor Inslee was born and raised in Seattle and graduated from the University of Washington and Willamette University College of Law. He served in the Washington State House of Representatives from 1989 to 1993 and served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1993 to 1995 and again from 1999 to 2012. He was elected governor of Washington in 2012 and re-elected in 2016, serving as chair of the Democratic Governors Association for the 2018 election cycle. After dropping out of the 2020 primary presidential campaign, he immediately announced his intention to seek a third term as governor, and he won with 57% of the votes, becoming the first incumbent governor of the state elected to a third term in more than 40 years. I am so honored to have you as my guest, Governor Inslee. Welcome.
Well, this is a thrill for me. It's a thrill for this community that you have created, Jane, from Anna in Sweden to Christine in Olympia. It's amazing to me what you've done to connect people around the world to be our own bully pulpits that we need to be in the upcoming months. And I want to thank you for your leadership in so many ways. By the way, you did leave out one thing in my bio that I wanted to add, which is that I am the governor who has watched one of your early movies more time than any other governor in American history, in Cat Blue. And if you recall that character, Cat, they could never make her cry. She would be persistent, resilient, and successful. And I love the fact that you're doing that against climate change right now. So I'm glad to be with you.
You're one of a kind, I tell you, Governor. Thank you very much. You've managed to implement many innovative environmental and climate protecting programs and laws in your state. Things like homes converting to electric heat pumps, closing tax loopholes for big oil, subsidies to help low-income households convert. Tell us about them and how you managed to pull that off.
Well, the three things you listed, it's interesting you list those things because in the panoply of weapons we have against climate change, those are things that are really common sense. They help real people where they really live in their homes to have more energy efficient homes. Because you know, the cheapest clean energy is always the energy you don't waste, right? Amory Lovin calls them negawatts. So we focus first on efficiency in our homes, in our buildings, in our transportation system. So we've done these things that are really not that sexy, if you will, but are really helpful. People change their own lives to get heat pumps, more insulation, to find energy efficiency in their utilities. So these are the things that can really help, and these little bites really add up. But we've done some big things too on the sort of mega scale that I just want to mention to you because we're proud of it in our state. First, we have the most rigorous, the most ambitious clean electrical grid, 100% clean insistence on a clean defossilized electrical grid. And this is probably in the jewel in the crown of what we've been able to do in our state. For several reasons. One, it's the earliest. Second, it's the most enforceable. Third, it has the best environmental justice provisions. So we prevent BIPOC communities and communities of poverty having to experience this toxicity. And it has the best provision to make sure that when we create these clean energy jobs, they're high-paying family wage jobs, not low-paying jobs, because this inequity in our society is unsustainable. So I would think, actually, that's probably the thing we're proudest about. We're glad that the president has, to some degree, modeled that on a national scale that we're thrilled about. And we were able to do that because we're a scientifically literate state. We have one of the most beautiful places in the solar system, and we want to preserve it. And we've had, leaders, and I'm one of them who has fought for this in a variety of ways. And we've done it by referendum. We passed a renewable portfolio standard over 10 years ago now that has created a $7 billion wind turbine industry. And we also have the best energy efficiency standards for our building. So we have done a lot. And we've been able to do this through the power of persistence. And I actually kind of think the theme of our discussion today is the need for persistence right now. The people on your call, they've been writing emails and letters and for a long time. And right now, in the middle of the COVID, we have got to be persistent to make sure the US Congress is ambitious as humanly possible on this, and that governors in every state join me in these efforts. So I'm glad to be involved in this discussion.
Thank you. Where does your electricity come from for this grid?
Well, we're fortunate that we have hydropower, which is, very low carbon emitting significantly. We have a huge and burgeoning wind turbine industry, as I've indicated, that's creating jobs, by the way, all over the place. I remember meeting a guy coming down, driving his pickup down from servicing one of these wind turbines, and I started talking to him about climate change, and he goes, well, climate change, I think it's good that we're fighting climate change, but you know what it means to me? It means this shiny new white pickup, because I got a great job servicing these wind turbines. That's what it means to me. We have burgeoning solar industry in our state. Now, I know a lot of people don't think the sun shines here. It actually does. But most importantly, we're generating them. I just went to a celebration in Anacortes, Washington last week, where the largest manufacturer of solar panels, the most efficient in the Western Hemisphere, is now building a new plant in Burlington, Washington. And so we have an eclectic mix, and we have substantial new technologies. We're bringing on what probably will be the Western Hemisphere's largest pump storage facility, where we can use wind power when we have excess wind and we can't use it. You create a big battery in a lake. So you basically pump water up to a big, big lake. And when you need it, when the wind slows down, you run that battery back through a turbine to generate electricity. And it's a closed loop, so you don't use any real water. It's a consistent system. So we're using all of those mechanisms. But again, I want to reiterate, the first thing we use is efficiency. And efficiency in our transportation system of maximizing public transportation opportunities for people, which are so much more efficient than, single occupancy cars. So you don't have to sit in a traffic bumper to bumper spewing diesel smoke or smoke out your stack. You've got light rail, which we're building, a light rail system, rapid bus system. And that was one of our big achievements, to have the greenest transportation package in our state's history a few years ago. So we're cooking on all cylinders, but we're not done yet. We got more work to do in my state.
And I assume you're cooking on electric stoves.
We are. We're making that transfer. But I'll give you an indication that, this is not totally paradise yet. I've tried to get a bill through my legislature this year that would accelerate that transition away from natural gas. I didn't quite get it across the finish line. So, and last night, my Senate passed two bills that we need, one to create an absolute cap and a revenue source for people, and a clean fuel standard. And we just passed these through the Senate last night. We now have to get these through both chambers. My point is, even in Washington state, with an aggressive governor, there's still more work to do. So we still have a job to do here too.
We have to keep our muscles strong and
Indeed.
stay.
Indeed.
Yeah. By the way, for members of the audience who don't understand what the governor meant when he said BIPOC communities, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. That's what BIPOC stands for.
Thanks, Jane.
Governor, as you know, unfortunately, there's been an uptick in extremism and white nationalism. Do you think that as I do, that Biden is, what he's doing with his COVID relief and his massive proposals for job creation that's going to help folks who lost jobs or are underemployed all over the country, do you think that this is going to reduce the extremists' influence and power?
To some degree. I do think that it won't not alleviate this concern, because unfortunately there is a reality of racism in our country that still exists, that's still a stain on our future, and it won't eliminate all that. But what it hopes it will do is to reduce the economic anxiety that people feel, that then allows them some of that fear-based racial animosity to be reduced. And what we've experienced throughout American history is when there has been economic anxiety and there have been demographic changes. You have seen these eruptions of a horrific hatred, like fueled the insurgency at the Capitol 2 months ago. So anything to reduce inequity in our society, to increase economic security, simultaneously reduces some of those nastier, darker strains of that is in our character historically. And I do believe it has the capacity to do this. Look, we're doing this big time. We're tying our efforts in Washington to have a more progressive tax system, as the president is doing on the federal level, and expand the social safety net for those of lower income groups and increase economic security. We want to increase our working family tax credit in our state. And we now have had one of, if not the largest reductions of childhood poverty with Senator Murray and Representative DeLauro, backed by the president, to reduce childhood poverty. What they have done, this is extraordinary. This measure in 1 year should reduce child poverty by something like 20%. This is an enormous achievement in the arc of the moral universe. And I don't think we should downplay the significance of this. Now, we need to make this permanent so it's lasting through the decades, and Congress needs to put their shoulder wheel to get that done. But I do believe it has the ability to calm the waters and get people thinking more of their economic prospects and not be fear-based. Fear is a fuel for hatred and distrust and racism, frankly. And so we want to reduce that. And I could not be more pleased the direction we're going on the economic justice part of this. And by the way, if I may, I don't want to go too long in our conversation without linking the fight against climate justice with the fight against racial injustice and gender injustice and injustice against individual members. These things are linked at the hip, because climate change, we know who the biggest victims of climate change are. They are communities of color. They're like the most pronounced kind of experience I've had to bring that to bear is I met about a 14-year-old Latinx young woman. She lived on the banks of the Duwamish. This is the industrial area in Seattle. I met her, I don't know, 10 years ago now. And she told me that she was 11 years old before she knew that some children don't have asthma, because she had asthma and all her friends had asthma. Well, because they're living down next to the smokestacks in the industrial level or area, and they're living next to the freeway, breathing diesel smoke. And they have an epidemic of asthma, which is so much more acute in communities of color, because those are the folks who are living next to these sources of pollution. And so there is a racial justice aspect of the need to defeat climate change that is profound, and in linking the same work of the arc of the moral universe that Reverend King talked about with the arc of the environmental universe, which is to preserve our health associated with these issues. By the way, this young woman was pretty amazing. She did her own epidemiological research. She went out and knocked on doors and tried to determine the asthma rates in the proximity of kids' homes next to these toxic sources. And she found this very close correlation of how close you live next to these sources. Yeah. And I checked her work by the University of Washington epidemiologists, and they confirmed everything she said.
Yeah.
So this is an opportunity to advance the arc of the moral universe, as well as our own survival, as a civilization.
This is a national problem. This, kids growing up thinking that, isn't it normal that everybody has asthma? That's right. I've heard that from kids in Houston and in Louisiana and in just an hour south. In California, people live right next to oil wells and fracking pits, and their asthma's rampant. They call them sacrifice zones, right?
Yes. And I'll tell you, it's everywhere. I met a group in New Mexico, some young parents who'd banded together to insist that their school district get electric buses, because these kids are breathing this diesel smoke, especially in New Mexico on cold mornings. They'll sit there and idle, and these kids are breathing this diesel smoke like crazy. Yeah. And I just point this out to show how to some degree, it's not just the president who has power in this fight. It's mothers and fathers, and it's everybody on this phone call or the Zoom call that has the ability to do some of these things that are right down home
Right.
to inspire this transition to the electrifier transportation system. Those things are just as important as what the president or governors are doing. That's why I'm so inspired by this group.
Let me ask you, Washington is, it has a very large indigenous population who've been very vocal on climate action. How do you engage with indigenous communities in your state? And how can state climate policy make sure that it's embedded in justice and meets the needs of all communities?
Well, we have a sovereign to sovereign relationship with our tribal communities. When I meet with these leaderships as one sovereign to another, these are treaties, and they're part of the US Constitution, as you know, they're part of our federal law, these treaties. So we give them the utmost respect. And I have to tell you, one of the greatest virtues of our state are these tribal communities who help everybody, not just the tribal members. And I'll tell you why. The tribal communities, by culture, treaty, and otherwise, are so committed to the continuation of our natural resources. It is in part of their very being. And so the salmon are not some different species to our tribal communities. They're part of their very heart. And as a result, these tribal communities are tremendous advocates for clean water, for clean air, for habitat for our salmon and our endangered orcas. Mm-hmm. And because of their advocacy, that helps everybody in the state of Washington preserve our, the most beautiful state in the country. And so we are so happy to have a strong tribal community presence who are allies in the fight to preserve our salmon in so many different ways. And as our salmon go, so go our orca, and as our orca goes, so go we. So this is a hugely beneficial thing, not just for the tribal communities, but for the 7 million people. When these tribes are fighting for clean water as they're doing, and as you know, carbon is as dangerous in our water as it is in the air because it is acidifying our oceans. It is making them more acidic. I can throw a rock over to Budd Inlet over here. It's the southern part of Puget Sound. That water is 30% more acidic than it was in 1792 when Captain Vancouver got to Puget Sound. And it is becoming more acidic. It will be twice as acidic as in pre-industrial times by the end of this century. My point is when the tribal communities are fighting against carbon pollution, and they're helping us big time doing this. I met with them 3 days ago to talk about this. When they are for a clean fuel standard, when they're for caps, when they want clean electrical grids, they're fighting for my grandchildren. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. So this is a blessing for our state, and we're going to make it work.
We have a lot to learn from our indigenous brothers and sisters. The whole notion of 7 generations, right?
Well, we were just talking about your advocacy back in the 70s to preserve a tribal facility in the former Fort Lawton in Seattle, which is now the Daybreak Star community, where the tribes remind us of this cultural richness. And I've enjoyed many meetings there. So thank you for your advocacy then. I'm glad it's continuing. I
stood with them to fight for the salmon too. That 1970, most of the people on this call weren't even born.
Well, we're just having another success. When you go to the Capitol in a few years, you will see the statue of a tribal leader named Billy Frank Jr., who is a good friend of ours. And we are now putting his statue as one of our 2 favorite sons and daughters in the US Capitol in Statuary Hall. It's going to be a joyous time.
The Franks have been critical in the fight to preserve the salmon. Yeah.
But it takes a fight sometimes, as you know.
Almost always. How have you, or how will you engage with the Biden administration's plan to build back better? How does the American Jobs Plan impact states and states' economic recovery plan?
Well, in every way imaginable. First, on the clean energy front, the investments that he has called for. And by the way, I actually think he's downplayed a little bit what he's actually called for. If you really do the numbers, it's larger than he's maybe even talked about. So I want him not to hide the light under the bushel here. But the clean energy investments can help us in so many different ways with advanced battery storage capability. We talked about this issue of renewable energy. Renewable energy by its nature can be intermittent. So you are producing more power than you're using at times. So being able to have a grid system that is fully compatible with renewable energy so that we can store the energy when we're not using it, its excess capacity, is extremely important. And being able to finance that storage capacity with advanced batteries. I talked about this this pump storage technique that we're developing here. This is extremely important. Upgrading our grid to be more efficient. Look, we don't want to lose any energy on our wires right now, and making that more efficient in a number of ways is very, very possible. The ability to help people acquire energy efficient vehicles is extremely important. And I am thrilled to know that this is a real capable in Congress. By the way, Senator Schumer, this is a very much a mission for him, and I appreciate that. So we can get access to everybody to an electric car as soon as humanly possible. This technology is simply amazing. And this has been a personal thrill for me to know that the electric car, the passion for the electric car has actually taken root in DC. If I may just tell you one little story. When I was in Congress in about 2005 or 6, I saw this vision of electric cars becoming possible and eliminate this huge carbon coming out of our tailpipes, eliminate tailpipes. And I wanted to convince my colleagues about this vision of the electric cars. So I had General Motors, and we brought down a prototype of the General Motors Volt, if you recall it. It was a hybrid electric car, and this was very much a prototype. So we brought it down. We brought it down in a U-Haul truck. I brought it next to the Longworth building. I called my colleagues to come down and see the future, what it looked like. So we rolled it down the ramp, and everybody huddled around, and then we opened up the hood, and there was nothing under the hood. There was no motor there. And so they sort of asked the GM reps, well, where's the motor? And they said, well, we actually don't have a motor yet. We're kind of working on that. And my colleagues say, well, this is a bunch of hooey. This is just a little toy, Inslee, you brought us down to look at. Heck with you. And they all sort of walked away, kind of give me a little grief. But I really believed it then, and it has come to pass now that the electric car is cost effective, low carbon, comfortable, safe, fun to drive, wonderful. And to see this transition from that maybe a little embarrassing episode in 2005, now 2021, where we have the US Congress poised to be able to subsidize people to actually, so that everybody can get access to this technology as soon as possible. Again, this is a climate issue, but it is an equity issue as well, right? So that lower income people can get access to this wonderful technology as well. So it's both a climate issue and an equity issue. And I look forward to Congress getting that job done. Now that's just, I mentioned 3 of the things that this project's going to do for our state, which is incredible. Tied to his plan, it's not technically in the plan, but his increased access to health care is so wonderful. Not only are we preserving and defeating the Republicans, stopping them from repealing health care, the Obamacare, we're actually expanding access so more people can buy into the Obamacare. This is an enormous victory, and it is tied to climate change because climate change fundamentally is a health issue, right? This isn't just about, we love polar bears, and I really do love polar bears, but this is a health issue about our kids' health. You mentioned at the top of your show, hundreds of thousands of people die because of air pollution every year in this country. So we're attacking this on 2 fronts. Stop it in the front end by stopping the pollutants, but also expanding access to health care to everybody in the country. This is why this issue is so tied into so many of the values that we hold dear, including equity. So we all ought to be excited about this.
And the climate scientists have said that it's not a question of when, of is there going to be another health pandemic, but when. with the melting ice sheets that contain pathogens that we have no resistance to, the expanding into forests where we release animals that have pathogens that we have no resistance to. It's going to happen, and we need to have a very robust health system in the whole country. I mean, it's unbelievable that there are parts of this country where you have to go for hours to find a health clinic or a hospital.
Yeah, no, the health impacts of this, the first order health impacts is when you breathe these particulates and it causes childhood asthma, it causes increased cardiovascular, it causes increased cancer. That's the first order, but there are many, many second order health impacts.
Right.
One of which is increasing the vector for disease of insect-borne disease. I was in a health insurance company in, I believe, Minnesota a few years ago, and they had a big room where they sort of monitor the whole health of the world. And they had a big board. It sort of looked like that board in Dr. Strangelove, where it showed all the missiles were coming in. And it showed where the increasing vectors were of dengue fever and Lyme disease and a whole host of other diseases. And it showed where the range of these insects that carry these diseases were increasing. And it looked like the big board in Dr. Strangelove, where you saw these lines heading up north towards America. We're already experiencing the expansion of these diseases today. And it's also causing the health impacts of mass migration. And, this is a difficult issue sometimes to talk about because sometimes it sounds, cataclysmic, but it is. If you look at the heat maps, large swaths of areas near the equator will become very difficult for people to even work in because they're too hot to really go outside and work. Yeah. And this is today causing mass migration. We're seeing it from Central America on our borders. We're seeing it where people are, and our hearts just bleed to see these people crossing the Mediterranean because of the desertification that is happening in North Africa. And all the health, people are drowning because of climate change today. Yeah. So this is a health issue. And I do reiterate this because I think sometimes in the climate change community, we're so in love with our natural systems that mean so much to us, we forget this is an issue about humans first. And so they're worthy of talking about.
My favorite ex-husband, Ted Turner, he created a bumper sticker that said, "Save the humans." He wanted people to know this isn't just about butterflies and polar bears.
Well, it is. We need to remind ourselves. I was on a stage at the Paris climate talks a couple of years ago with Jerry Brown and a few other governors, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, former Governor Schwarzenegger, was on the panel. And we got done because they'd asked us about the economic impacts of climate change. And so we all talked about what the downside was of damage to the forest products industry, damage to the fisheries industry, and also the jobs creating opportunity of clean energy, which are profound. And he spoke last, and he just started shaking his fingers at it. He says, "What is wrong with you? You're so stupid. All you governors are so stupid. This is a health issue first and foremost. You should always lead with the health message." And I actually think he's right in that regard. So I know we'll lead when we talk to our congressmen and women about that.
Well, what advice do you have for members of Congress right now to resist the inevitable pressures that are going to come from the fossil fuel lobbyists around Biden's climate measures?
Well, what advice I would give? Okay, so first I would say, think of project yourself to the end of your mortal life here, which is pretty brief, by the way, and just go forward and think of yourself. You don't know when that'll be or where you'll be exactly, but try to look backwards to this moment and think about how you will think about your career as a member of the U.S. Congress, which is a privilege. There's only been about 10,000 Americans have that privilege. And think about how you will want your legacy to be and project that and think about what's going to be going on in the world at that time. You know that no matter how long it's going to be, climate will be a more pressing problem at the end of our lives than it is today, given the raging nature of this problem. And you know that of all the things you worked on, this is the thing that will be most prolific in its impact on your constituents. And it will be the thing that will be the most historic, looking at this from a decadal or a century viewpoint. Now we work on a lot of things that are important. I'm working, getting my kids back into school. That's important. We've had success on this. We're getting a vaccine. This is great in COVID. But these are in some sense relatively short-term issue. Climate is for keeps. And what I would advise them is just think about how you want to think about your legacy and how you would want to be remembered 50 years from now, or even maybe even 100 years from now. How would you want to be remembered? Which side were you on? You know, sometimes you make a basic decision. Which side are you on? You know, if you were a legislator, what side would you have wanted to be on now back in the 60s in the civil rights legislation? What side would you want to be remembered on that side? We pretty know which side historically you would have wanted to be on. And I think this is the same type of issue. Now, I'm leery comparing climate change to the civil rights era because John Lewis and those heroes, we can never be as heroic as John Lewis, but we can be inspired by him and to think about it in historic terms. So that's my personal advice to members of Congress. Mm-hmm. Realize this is the biggest thing you're going to do to either succeed or fail on a historic basis. Yeah. Have your great-grandchildren proud of you. They may not even know you, but try to make them proud, because this is how they'll judge you ultimately. And
that's very beautiful.
All about.
That's very profound. Thank you for that, Governor. We're going to take audience questions now. Okay, Maddie, do you want to give us some questions?
Yes, and we have a lot of very grateful and excited Washingtonians on the call.
Great.
Surprise.
So the first question is from Ashley on Zoom. Governor, have you been in touch at all with President Biden or the Biden administration? For example, have there been any discussions about climate plans or looking forward to the Global Climate Summit?
I've talked just briefly. I talked to Bruce Reed the other day and congratulated him, frankly, and encouraged him forward on a couple things. My kind of team, I have a team called the Evergreen Group, and it was a group that mostly worked on my presidential campaign, and they've now got a group that does quite a bit of contact with the administration in a lot of different ways. And fortunately, I've got some of my team now working with the administration. Maggie Thomas works with the EPA. Reed Schuler's working with Secretary Kerry. So I've got my team that sort of infiltrated the administration a little bit. And I'm really pleased with what the administration has done. They have done so much so rapidly. I'm just delighted. Now, we know we can always be more ambitious. We're going to ask Congress to be more ambitious everywhere possibly. But I just have to tell you, and frankly, what I've seen from President Biden, he has really taken this to heart. And that's important to have a president who's taken it to heart. So I'm very gratified what they're doing. Now, there's some things that I want them to be more ambitious on. Of course, that's always going to be the case. But here's an important point I want to make too. No matter what happens at the federal level, we at the state level need to be bolder, faster, more ambitious, because we can be. We can do things politically in Washington state that you won't be able to do in the federal government. And the reason I mention this is that everybody on this call, I hope you spend equal time developing a powerful relationship with your governor or the mayor of Stockholm. I saw Anna from Sweden on there. These local officials are just as important as the federal officials in this regard. The kind of things that I talked about we're doing in our state may not be able to be done on the federal level, but we can do them in our state. We have the U.S. Climate Alliance. It's 25 states that have now banded together on this. They're all making progress on a state level in advance of the federal government. So realize that you can make big, big changes in your state, in your county, in your city, in your neighborhood. And if we do that, we're going to have great things.
Thank you. From Anna on Facebook, there are about 30 countries that have a carbon tax. Do you think that this is something that might be introduced in the US eventually?
It's possible. We are pursuing a pricing system in our state right now, just passed to my Senate last night, a version of it that isn't formally a tax. It's a cap and invest system. It will put a cap, which I believe is very, very important, to cap the amount of pollution and force polluters to pay for the ability to do that. And that generates revenue, puts a price on carbon, creates an incentive to decarbonize the economy, and also generates revenues that can be used for clean energy to help people get more efficient homes and utilities, to help have a greener transportation system, all of the other investments. There are many ways to have a pricing system. And I do believe having a price on carbon is a very, very important leg of the stool. It is not the only one, but it is an important leg of the stool. This is one of the places where states, I believe, will be able to move forward in as many states as we can to use that mechanism to both create an economic incentive to decarbonize your operations, but also to generate revenue that can be used to help people create clean energy jobs. And I have proposed a variety of them. I hope we can get this one through my legislature this year. We still need a couple votes to get that job done. So yes, I do think it could be on the national radar screen. May not be today, but we've seen it succeed. By the way, I should note something about these pricing systems because this is an important part. What we have found unequivocally is that the states that have embraced clean energy policies have had the most rapid economic growth. You look at the U.S. Climate Alliance, these are the states that are moving forward. These are the states that have above average economic growth, my state being one of them. U.S. News and World Report just listed Washington State for the second year in a row as the best state in the United States to live in. And part of that is because of our very robust economic growth, our thousands of jobs that we're creating in clean energy. Decarbonizing your economy makes your economy more productive, not less. And we ought to be proud about this. We're the group, we're the optimists who want economic growth. We understand where clean energy jobs come from, and we want them right here, not just in China, not just in Italy. Nothing against those countries, but we want those clean energy jobs here. So this is an economic growth model that we should adopt. And a pricing system on carbon has been successful in many, many places where that has gone on. And we have learned from other countries, by the way. This is one of our advantages, actually. My state has learned from other places. We've learned from California. Our cap and invest system, frankly, is going to be better if we get it through than California's, because we have learned to have stronger environmental justice provisions to make sure that communities of color do well under this circumstance. It has stronger protection for working people. So we've had a chance to learn from other places. I think of Sweden. I went to Sweden in the early 70s and learned from Sweden about some of the work they were doing. So we learned from each other. And what we've learned is economic growth is promoted by clean energy policies. That's a lead pipe cinch, except we're trying to get lead out of our pipes. But in any event.
Thank you, Governor. From Daniel on Zoom, and we've had a few sort of similar to this. What is your best pitch, so to speak, to people that don't believe we're in a climate crisis? Do you feel that they can actually be convinced and change their minds?
Yes, I do believe that, because people have changed their minds quite dramatically in the last several years. It is clear that the number of people who recognize this as a serious problem has gone up fairly consistently in the last several years. And the reason for that, I would like to say, is, governor's eloquence and a million speeches. But the reason that has happened is that people are now seeing the consequences with their own with their own eyes, frequently in their own lives. So when we started this effort, when I first asked Al Gore to come to Congress to talk to my colleagues, a decade and a half ago, this was a line on a chart. We would show a graph showing the increase in parts per million, which was terrifying at the time because we knew its consequences. But it was a graph. And a graph is, not everybody lives and dies on graphs. Today, it's people in Bellevue, Washington, just east of Seattle, whose kids can't go outside and play in July and August because the smoke is so thick from the forest fires burning in eastern Washington. In 2 out of the last 3 years, that's been the circumstance. It's waking up and seeing ash. People woke up and saw ash on their cars in Bellevue, Washington. First time that's ever happened in Washington state history. It's the farmers in Iowa. Remember when I was campaigning, I was in Hamburg, Iowa. It was a town founded, I think, 1880, had never been flooded. And now I went through a tour and you saw the water 8 feet high in the houses and all of these destroyed grain bins. They store them in these silos, and these silos are all collapsed all over Iowa because of these floods. And that grain is ruined when that happens. It's the mayor of Miami Beach that I met who had to build up his road several feet because of the recurrent flooding. So when you walk down Miami Beach now, you walk down from the sidewalks, kind of weird, you walk down into the shops because they've had to build it up. It's the recurrent extreme weather events where you get this flooding from Houston on all over the place of this recurrent rain events. This is one of the ironies that we get heavier rain events, including in my state. We've had these extreme weather events. So anyway, people are now living this. It's not an argument. It is a lived experience. And so people are changing their minds quite dramatically. And climate denial is no longer acceptable in any polite company of literate folks. So, and I'll tell you the proof on this. We knew this is the case because the Republican Party, who lived on just denying the problem, their politicians are now being instructed by their consultants not to deny climate change because it no longer is sellable, but instead just try to say, but we're just not quite ready to do something about it. Now that actually is worse, right? Kind of from a moral standpoint, it's worse to say, I recognize it's a problem, but I won't do anything about it. That is actually worse in my book of sins. But they recognize that this is no longer sellable to deny it. So anyway, the public is with us. It continues to move in that direction. And I believe we're at a tipping point where we've got a president who's got it in his heart. We got majorities in the Senate and the House. Now we got to do some work with some of our senators to reach good consensus. But I believe things are moving in our direction.
Wonderful, thank you. From Chris on Facebook, can you tell us about a time activists helped to win stronger climate policies in Washington, and what did that mean to you?
I'm really sorry I missed you. What was the first part of that question?
Absolutely. Can you tell us about a time that activists helped to win stronger climate policies in Washington?
Oh my gosh, yes. There's been so many times. We've never had a success that didn't involve activists. I'll just harken back a decade and a half where we wanted to promote renewable energy in our state, and we couldn't get the legislators to act. So myself and some others, a little band of activists got together, and we went out and collected signatures, pounded on doors and collected signatures and put on the ballot. And we won, narrow victory. And as a result, we now have a $7 billion wind turbine industry that was created solely because of those activists who went and pounded on doors. And I think of a guy named Sam Garst, one of the guys I love. He was a financial advisor, and he said, I'm going to go out and pass this initiative. He himself got 2,326 signatures himself to put that on the ballot. And now we have clean energy because of him. and he's not with us anymore. But I tell you what, anytime I get down in the dumps about how long this has taken to get this job done, I think of Sam, of him out pounding out the doors in the rain in Olympia, Washington. That's the kind of spirit we all need right now.
Wonderful, thank you. From Pam on Zoom, how can people on the West Coast come together to act on climate change?
Well, we have a West Coast Alliance that we work together on our states. We both share our, this West Coast Alliance, we share our policies, we try to coordinate them, we try to make them as close to each other as possible to have consistency on the West Coast. We learn from each other. I've indicated we've learned from some of the experiences of California, and that's not a knock on California at all. They've led the way in a lot of ways. So we help each other in that way. We challenge each other, and this is important. We need to challenge each other to be bolder, more ambitious. Look, Oregon has some provisions in law that we don't have in my state yet. That drives me crazy. I don't want to be behind the ducks. And so we do that. Now, they don't have some of the policies we have either, so we're challenging them. So that's an important part of this.
Well, Governor, can you challenge California, please? Because, you know, California is an oil and gas producing state, and the oil that California produces is as dangerous almost as tar sands of Canada. It's very polluting, very dirty. And the Governor Newsom keeps signing new permits for fracking and drilling. We got to do something about this. And you talked earlier about the air pollution all over California. There's like 2.1 million Californians that live near an oil well drilling right outside their window, schools and churches and playgrounds that have oil wells right next to them and fracking pits, and people dying of cancer and heart disease and asthma because of this. And we need a safety buffer, and we can't get the governor to move. Maybe you can light a little fire under him.
Well, you know, I am willing to do that on occasion. But I don't have a single Oscar, Jane, and you have several. And so I think your powers of persuasion may be even more important.
Well, I'm doing all I can. I mean, now he thinks I'm shrill.
I know you are. I know you are. By the way,
do what you can, please.
I appreciate that. By the way, since you brought up Governor Newsom, I do want to say this. I will tell you, Governor Newsom will be 1,000% better on climate change than anybody else who could replace him in this crazy recall effort, though I want to say that we got to keep somebody there who's on the right side of this issue. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I will pass on your comments to him.
Thank you. Oh, he knows them very well.
Thank you, Governor. I think we have time for one more question, and this is a good one. From Dina on Facebook. What is one thing that people can do right now across the country to fight the climate crisis?
Well, anybody who lives in the state of Washington, I would say, I would ask them to call their representatives and urge them to pass the two bills we have right now, a Clean Fuel Standard and a Climate Commitment Act. That's for the state of Washington. But if you're outside the state of Washington, I'd urge you to do the same thing on a local basis. And the reason I say local is because I know everybody on this call has talked to their senator and their congressperson. Because you're active, you care about this. I believe probably everybody has done that. So I'm going to ask you to think about your local efforts in your cities, in your counties, in your state. Find an issue that you believe in on this score. Find a renewable portfolio standard that your state has not adopted yet. Find a transportation package that's under consideration in your county so that you can build more bus routes and light rail so that we don't have spewing gas. Get a local county to subsidize and put in electric charging station to accelerate. I just hope that you'll think locally and we will save globally. I hope you take that from this conversation.
Thank you very, very much. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Governor Inslee, I'm so grateful to you for joining us and for being such an incredible example of elected officials who really care and can be climate champions, and sincere congratulations on all the amazing things that Washington has been able to accomplish under your leadership. And we look forward to see what's happening next. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye-bye, adios. And to my audience, we've got a lot of urgent work to do in order to adequately address the climate crisis. You know, I talked at the beginning of the hour about how Biden's tax plan doesn't cut nearly enough of the subsidies that we pay to the fossil fuel corporations, and it's absolutely not acceptable. So please, please, please sign our petition. All of you, please don't go away until you've signed our petition to tell President Biden that he needs to work with Congress to eliminate $150 billion over 10 years to fossil fuels, the subsidies to go to them over 10 years. And we've collected 20,000 petition signatures already on this petition. We need more. Please go to firedrillfriday.com/take-action. I beg you, please go and sign that. And if you've already signed it, share it with your friends and colleagues. Get them to sign it. The fight for the future needs all of us. And speaking of the future, one final reminder to send videos of your climate kids for next week's special Earth Day Youth episode. We're inviting each of you to ask the young ones, what is climate change? And if you were a leader, if you were in charge, what would you do about it? Upload the video to any social media platform with the hashtag #ClimateKids. That's all for today. I hope each of you gets a few moments in the sun this weekend. Stay safe, stay in community, and as we continue to learn best how to navigate the transition from COVID, just be sure you follow the rules and stay safe. See you next time.